right, good evening. My name is David Smithy, and this is Against All Odds. I'm going to be your host this evening, and I'll be joined soon with Eric Lukow. He's running just a little bit late today, but thanks for tuning in. And we're going to just go ahead and kind of start until Eric gets here. I want to make just a few comments on what's happening in Ukraine. I look at it from a perspective of what's going on in the global financial markets. So that's kind of where my emphasis is, because I have a background in finance. Eric will add some commentary on some of the political implications of what's happening between Russia and Ukraine and the Western Bloc countries. But one thing that's a little bit interesting going live tonight is that there's a delay. And so work with me here, as it's the first time that we've done this live. Usually we do the broadcast and then post it up on YouTube. We thought we would go ahead and get started. And here's Eric. Hey, Eric, how you doing?
Hello, how are you doing, Dave? Glad to join you. And you may have to adjust your camera a little bit.
Hey, Eric.
Hello, how are you doing, Dave? Glad to join you.
All right. So, yeah, it's actually delayed on YouTube. So I have to shut it off so that I won't see what's happening there. But I was just sort of telling those who are watching right now, this is the first time we're going live. And so I'm going to make a few comments on what's happening in Ukraine from a financial perspective. And then, of course, you add the color with the commentary on some of the political impacts. But what is most recent in the news is these economic sanctions and trading sanctions between against Russia by the bloc, member organizations of the EU and then Germany and the UK. And these economic sanctions are, deliberately designed to sort of put a stranglehold on the Russian economy and to really force Putin to the peace table and to have him, in this act of aggression as soon as possible. So what's happened is that in response to these economic sanctions and trade sanctions, and by that I define them as an economic sanction would be akin to saying, look, we've been buying things from you and we're no longer going to buy them from you. Trade sanctions are, we've been selling, you things and we're no longer going to sell them to you. But I'm not sure how effective these sanctions are, because on the one hand, you could say, look, I'm not going to buy bread from you anymore, and you can't buy milk from us anymore. But hey, we've been buying our oil from you and our natural gas from you. Like in the case of Germany, about 50% of their of their gas comes from Russia, and about 30% of their oil comes from Russia. And so while they are simultaneously putting sanctions on Russia, they're also saying, except for this one thing, we're going to stop trading with you. And that one thing just happens to be the biggest export that Russia has. So it's a little bit ironic from my perspective to see these sanctions being put in place, but they're really, I think, more positioning than they are reality. I'm kind of wearing a jacket tonight as a reminder that with the sanctions that are being imposed on Russia, if Russia stops sending gas and oil, a lot of people are going to be putting on jackets when the weather's cold in these European countries. But what's happened is that Putin this evening has responded by saying, look, I gave you some warning as of tomorrow, which tonight is Thursday, March 31st. So tomorrow is Friday, April 1st. I don't know.
April Fool's Day.
April Fool's Day. I don't think he's fooling around. And what he said is,
he's not fooling
tomorrow,
around.
You must pay for my gas and my oil in rubles. No longer dollars, no longer European currency. You've got to pay in rubles, or else we're going to stop delivering. And as he said, we're not a charity. So the impact of that, the Biden administration.
We're not a charity. You got to just appreciate that moment of levity. We're not a charity.
Yeah, we're not a charity, right?
You're far from a charity. You are a global aggressor. I mean, you can get behind all the reasons why he's done what he's done, but I don't know if anyone is possibly debating whether or not Putin and Russia, the Russian Federation, is anywhere near a charity. Right now, they seem like the schoolyard bully at best.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, and we do appreciate the sort of tongue-in-cheek nature of that
Right.
comment. But, it's going to be something, because the Biden administration responded in kind by releasing another commitment to 180 million barrels of oil over the next 6 months. And so, that's roughly about, I think there's 42 gallons to a barrel, 44 gallons to a barrel. So, 44 million gallons is, 220 million if it's $5 a gallon into the U.S. economy. It's gonna help bring prices down. In fact, it's already helped the price of WTI Western oil to come down about 5% at about $100 a barrel, and crude oil down about 6-7% to still $107. So, we don't know if that's going to be showing up at the gas price pumps or not. But the way this is affecting the average American, citizen is that we've seen gas go up 70% year over year, and it's really going to affect the way that people vote when they go to the polls in the midterms in November. But I just wanted to kind of lead in with this developing story that Russia has decided to cut all contracts with those that don't pay in rubles to strengthen, his economy, to strengthen the ruble, because it's been hammered significantly with these sanctions. And Putin is saying this is an act of economic sovereignty for Russia.
Yeah, it's to me the big story here is, I believe. Do you remember the German? Is it the president or premier? Schenken or something is his name. I should look it up here. Should have been doing that, but he just got off. I read something that said he got off a phone call with Putin, and it said for the transactions would continue in dollars or euros, was his comment. So he had this conversation with Putin.
Yeah.
Let me look at the German chancellor here.
Yeah.
Who is it? I like to try and get these names right. But he I think just said that yesterday. Yeah, Olaf Scholz.
Yeah.
So Olaf Scholz gets off the phone with Putin yesterday, and then Putin goes ahead and signs this today. And I think this is kind of, we're watching happen right in front of our eyes how escalation works.
Absolutely.
Perhaps yesterday, Putin was trying to meet, they had some other, maybe other considerations on the table. Who knows what the Germans were threatening in response? Who knows? Because clearly, if you force the Germans now to go into the ruble market, they get into a situation where they could be seen as undermining the sanctions, right? And so Biden's already threatened the Chinese, saying, look, if you try to financially support or help him to go around the sanctions. So I don't know expert in sanctions and how they work, but I understand that one of the key aspects of these sanctions has been to freeze Putin's ability to work in the financial markets.
Right.
And, now if he's saying, hey, if you want to, everyone's kind of been criticizing the Germans. I think there's a couple of other European nations, maybe France and a few others, who also get gas from Russia, not as much as Germany. But I saw Poland is shutting off its imports of oil and gas. The United States has shut off its imports of oil and gas. And there was kind of this little exception area for the Germans and a few others in Europe who said we simply can't. We've gotten rid of all of our nuclear. We've got the intermittent wind power, the intermittent solar power. And really, this gas is what heats our homes. And so we're kind of strategically in a bad position. And this is exactly, by the way, what President Trump warned them about. I think he actually pointed his finger at Angela Merkel and said, you are making yourself strategically vulnerable to the Russians by getting so much gas. And at the time, he was poo-pooed as not understanding the Europeans were gentlemen and gentlewomen, and would work it out, and no such thing would ever happen. Here we find ourselves that Russia has this tremendous lever. And what's shocking to me is that Olaf here has to have some egg on his face. You just announced yesterday, this was in the works. The ruble thing had been announced, had been kind of talked around the news. Putin was thinking about this. I got on the horn, and I got old Vlad, and we had, some schnapps, and we talked, and he's gonna go ahead and continue. And the very next day, boom. Now, what happened to him? Well, I've heard through a couple of different news sources, NTD being one, that his own nationalist party inside Russia is somewhat turning against him. So he's got his right wingers too that he deals with. And so the left wingers there have been sort of anti-war, a lot of the cultural elites, a lot of the economic elites are frustrated that they're getting shut out of the world order by these sanctions. So they've been frustrated with the war. They're generally maybe morally against the idea of naked aggression. So they've been against the war, and he's been feeling pressure from that side.
Right.
That pressure is going to increase if he does the 130,000 conscripts. That pressure will increase from the Russian moms. But now I hear that the Hawks, the NTD pointed out, are putting pressure on him because they're seeing it as him not going far enough. And so now, why are we pulling back from Kiev? Why are we giving up on the idea that we're going to take over the whole country? Why are we going to Turkey and sitting down and having serious talks for the first time? Yeah. Looks like some progress was made. So now you look at Putin and think, oh my gosh, he fired up the hawkish portion of his people and really got some standing ovations and a lot of support on the idea that we're going to go and take over these Ukrainians and really denazify and free our fellow citizens, Russian-speaking citizens, and protect them. And people got all excited about it. Now we're saying, well, we didn't quite get it done. And so economically, I think it's interesting. What are the Germans now going to do? Because I don't know, Dave, you can tell me, is it circumventing the sanctions if you start doing your transactions in rubles? Aren't you then supporting the ruble? I mean, are you now kind of circumventing the very thing, the very pressure the West was trying to put on? And by the way, before the war has ended. There's a subplot here going on that I want to talk about, but before the war has ended, you're going to support the ruble?
Well, it's a good question. And of course, it's the one that's being asked tonight, by all the countries that are doing business, from Australia to the UK. UK is only about 5% dependent on Russian oil, but will we get our gas and our oil tomorrow? The answer is yes, they will, because there is a caveat in this that even though the orders continue, the payments aren't due until May. And so there's sort of like a 4 to 6 week grace period.
Yeah, Germany payment terms. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, payment terms. And Germany has already come out and said very clearly that these contracts that they have with Russia, that all the countries have with Russia, is for payments denominated in US dollar or in Europe.
Yeah, standard.
And that would be a breach of contract
force the ruble.
Yes, to force the ruble. However,
which, by the way, gives Germany an opportunity to get out of the contract, right? But they have to find replacement gas and oil.
And that's not so easy. Yes. That is not easy. Yeah. As a matter of fact, I mean, even though the U.S. is releasing its oil reserves, 180 million barrels, as we mentioned, over the next 6 months, Japan is not as willing to do that, nor is the UK. And so what's happened is that it's the perfect storm, Eric, is because of COVID, the demand for energy was highly reduced because, people just weren't out traveling. Of course, the ships and distribution supplies weren't operating. The aviation industry was all but grounded. There was minimal, trafficking. And so the demands went down severely. Now, after the end of COVID, the demand is increasing at a rate that it's very hard to keep pace with. And so the reason that we're kind of in this conundrum is because everything would have been fine. The OPEC member countries would have been able to supply all the oil and energy that we needed globally, but for the fact that there was an invasion in Ukraine. And so, in the realm of all considerations, it does not dismiss my attention, and I take note that the timing of this is highly suspect and irregular, I might add, because now we're in this crucible. And what is OPEC's response? Couldn't you just say, hey, it makes sense. Why don't we just go to OPEC and say, hey, guys, that's what you're here for. Ramp it up. Let's get this thing going, put some steam in there, throw some coal in that thing. Let's fire it up. And you know what their response is? Oh, no. you see, this isn't a market imbalance, which is where we get involved. This is something that's being caused because of geopolitical, adversaries acting out. So OPEC's stance is that our contract is to balance the regular trade of energy requirements, and this is outside of that. So they're not stepping up. So that's
and
why
I don't believe physically they could really logistically step up either or anyways. I don't know how they'd get that energy to Germany. I mean, the interesting thing to me is historically Germany is a landlocked power basically, and that's a lot of the reason for World War I and World War II. They have to deal with their neighbors. They're a massive power, and they're an economic powerhouse today, but they are landlocked. Now, what's interesting to me is why would you then make yourself strategically vulnerable to a former and potential enemy by making them the sole source of your energy, essentially, or the majority source. It begs the question, and it tells you that in every country there's a group of people. Typically they're the Green Party, but they're just hoping for the best. They're assuming the best.
Yeah.
They see, they believe in tabula rasa, that everybody's, this perfect, pure human being. And but for the wrong environment as children, nobody would walk up on stage at the Oscars, say, and slap somebody in the face. But
Nice.
people don't do things like that. The tabula rasa, we are pure human beings. There's obviously competing philosophy that, human nature is red in tooth and claw. And the idea that, it's vicious out there and there's something within human beings that, causes them to do evil that we can't really explain. And I think, when you look at what happened between Russia and Ukraine, you can carve a story up, or you can build a story up, and you did very well early on saying, hey, he's being surrounded. He's been very clear that this is going to be a provocation for him, that he's going to react. You've got the dam in the Crimea, starving out a group of people he's trying to support, so you can see the way he sees the world, and he's seeing everything kind of squeeze down on him. And at some point he's got to flex his muscles and show that he can't be pushed around. And so that's an argument. But when you look at the on the ground brutality, that's when you say, hey, maybe, again, like the slap at the Oscars, maybe this isn't the way to settle things. And so I think we're watching escalation happen. We've seen it happen before in the world, where people take, party A takes an action. They think that everyone else is going to respond, diplomatically, carefully, conservatively, but people have agendas. And so they see it as an opportunity. Then they respond in what they believe, by the way, is a careful diplomatic, we're drawing lines between, MiGs and Harpoon missiles and versus, giving them, Stingers and other missiles, that really good one, they use the Javelin. So we're saying, we're trying to draw these lines. And even in the effort to draw the lines, whether they get drawn in the right place or not, a person like Putin can look at that and say, okay, they're trying not to escalate. But as in every schoolyard, there's a lot of little kids around the corner egging everybody on with their opinions, and people then things slip out of your mouth. We've seen Joe Biden, have several things slip out of his mouth, things that in my mind would go beyond what you would call, presidential gaffes. A gaffe is something where you mispronounce, or you use the wrong word, or you call somebody a wrong name. It's something where everybody understands what you meant, but you said the wrong thing. We're having fish for dinner, and everyone knows it's steak, and you had fish last night and fish just popped out. That's a gaffe. When someone's saying, you're going to find out when you're in Ukraine, all you soldiers I'm talking to, how hard these Ukrainian soldiers are fighting and how tough they have it, how brave they are.
Right.
That's not a gaffe. That's either somebody who misunderstands the strategy. It could be that he just misunderstood that they weren't going to go, misunderstood who he was talking to. Maybe several strategies had been reviewed before him, one of which was sending troops in, and he got them confused on which one they finally ended up on.
Yeah.
Maybe there's a strategy that we don't know about, and he's letting the cat out of the bag. But that was not a gaffe in the sense that, he said the airborne 82nd, he meant the 101st. This is not, these are things that are coming out. Him saying, I can't remember the exact words, but very emotional. What the hell? We got to get this guy the hell out of there. Again, that's not a gaffe.
Right.
And to say something, the White House, I mean, they've got some great spin doctors over there, but to say, well, that was a personal expression of his personal emotions. Well, I'm sorry, you really don't get that privilege as a president. Not when you're standing in front of a podium at a meeting with
Yeah.
other, heads of state, what was possibly personal about that?
Well,
I mean, if he's on the golf course, playing around with Donald Trump and he wants to, over cigars shout that out and
yeah.
it gets caught by a hot mic, okay, I could say, okay, that's his personal opinion. Even then, I'd say be more careful. But so what I'm trying to say is, I don't think Putin's in control of the war anymore. I don't think Biden is really in control of the response. I don't think Schultz, who can tell, can't even gets
Yeah.
on a
Yeah.
head of state phone call with somebody who's a significant trading partner, who, by the way, you would think Putin would want to do everything he could to help Schultz, because Schultz is still buying his oil, right? I mean, Schultz has defended, we need to buy Russia's oil, even though everybody else has shut it off. And Canada shut it off. Trudeau shut
Yeah.
it off. So you would think Putin would be saying, look, you're the guy that I had, you've scratched my back, I'll scratch your back, even though we're, semi at war or whatever, deals are made, right? And so even I think the Nazis and allies were having, conversations behind the scenes at certain levels. And I'm just looking at this thinking, man, nobody's in control anymore.
Well, so that's kind of one of the topics that you and I discussed offline yesterday, which was, but before I go there, let me just kind of dovetail into some comments that you made earlier. One of which is that, even at the height of the Cold War, Russia continued to supply, energy, oil and gas. So there was never a time when that was ever in threat or in danger. In fact, the Nord Stream 1 was introduced about, I don't know, 10 or 12 years ago. So, this has been something of an alliance for a long time now. There was no reason to think that there would be any, disruption, even if there was, that at least if everything else wasn't going well, the gas and the oil would still continue. So I think that's sort of in the back of the minds of these leaders, that Russia is still, look, when it comes down to it, there's a lot of things that you're willing to put on the line, but not your major source of export. People need to know that they can rely on you, even if there are adversarial advances or strong words. You're still going to give the oil, because of course you need the money that we're going to give you in exchange for that. The other thing I wanted to mention was that Joe Biden, as you said, he is notoriously famous for these more than gas. Remember when he was talking about the election, when he was facing off against Donald Trump, and he told the American people, I don't need your vote. I just need your support after the election, because he knew it was in the bag. And, and he's done this repeatedly, where he just, spits out what his true intentions are. And there's always spin to cover it, but I think you have to pay attention to it. So let me refer back to our offline conversation yesterday, where, we were asking one another, so what's the outcome here? What's going on? Because the U.S. is not making any more than a commitment to provide certain low-level arms and ammunitions to the Ukrainian soldiers, because as I had mentioned in the publication, the Substack, there's a journalist by the name of Caitlin Johnstone, and she had commented on how America is willing to fight this battle to the last Ukrainian death. And so,
yeah, sad.
But we were posturing, what's the outcome of this? You're now saying that Putin doesn't seem to be in control of it. Certainly Zelensky is not in control of it. Germany has no real idea of what's going on. So is it possible that the answer will be found after the dust has settled and we find out who's securing the contracts to rebuild the damage that's been done in Ukraine? Because these major cities, and you listed them off yesterday, all of them but
Kharkiv, Mariupol,
and Kiev remain. So someone's going to make a lot of money in the redevelopment of that country. And you and I talked about if it has a Russian contractor doing the work or an American contractor doing the work. Chinese, yeah.
So here's,
yeah,
I absolutely agree with you that there's going to be a post hoc analysis, and we're going to find out cynically, as we did with the Iraq War and everything else, that it leads back to the dollars, and we have to be sensitive to the military industrial complex in our own country. You can do a very good study on the military industrial complex in World War II Japan, because it was certainly those companies that were driving the military to encourage the emperor to attack America. And so there's no question that some companies get so big that they decide that just beyond creating innovative products that are valuable and then marketing them in a way that gets people to buy them to expand their profits, they decide that they can actually affect elections. They can actually start wars.
absolutely.
They can actually, have regime change. They can actually, sink better technologies. There's a lot of, pharmaceuticals that will get the patent, control of the patent of a medicine that's better than their medicine, and then not actually prosecute the patent, so that medicine's never created, and the poor people who could benefit from that.
Yeah.
So we have plenty of evidence that corporations get to such a size that their own best interests step over the best interests of the community, and we accept that to a degree in capitalist societies, saying that in general people's self-interest to make a profit lines up with the larger interest of the community, and that's the best system we've been able to put in place. But there's no doubt that certain companies get to a certain size and they get a certain hubris. And I would argue that the infotech giants right now are really at that place when it comes to affecting elections. And we're seeing that a whole separate show, but we can talk about the Hunter Biden laptop, as everyone's saying, no matter what you believe about the actual messing with the election, stuffing this story in October probably changed the result. And even, mainstream outlets are starting to at least hint at that. But to get back to specifically where is this war going, and me and you talking yesterday, I had put on the table yesterday that this is probably going to end up being a really big loss for Putin, because at the end of the day, my guess is the Ukrainian people are going to reject Russian contractors. They're going to reject Chinese contractors. They're going to really have a lean towards the West, to the extent that he was worried that Ukraine was going to lean West. In a strange way, he's kind of sealed that deal. They're leaning West. And you can see that in Zelensky's recent offers. He's saying, look, I'll be neutral, and I won't do NATO as long as I have a security guarantee along the lines of Article 5. That's as good as being part of NATO, right? I mean, even Britain said we can't do that.
The article, sure.
Yeah, that's really smart guys saying, oh, if NATO's the problem, we don't need NATO. Just give me the one piece, that Putin's worried about.
That's what I rely upon.
And so what I said, yesterday to you, and I put forward, and you had a great counter, but I said, what happens if, 2 years from now, Ukraine is this vibrant economy because the US and the EU have poured into the rebuilding of it, again, to enrich their own contractors, and we all know how that works. But and all of a sudden, Russia looks over and says, hang on a second here, I've got this massively impressive economy that wasn't there before, pro-Western, all but joined NATO. Maybe they have some security guarantees less than Article 5. But I've also really not got the option or the threat, the credible threat, to attack them again. Because I've seen what has happened, and I got bogged down. I had to pull out, and all I got was the Donbass region. And what's interesting is Zelensky has been emboldened, because the latest peace talks, from what I've heard, is Zelensky said, hey, NATO's out. Give me security guarantees as close to Article 5, I'm guessing, as he can get. He said, I'll put Crimea in a box. We'll just leave that like Cyprus and let that be negotiated for the next 45 years. Who really owns that? Okay, we'll compartmentalize it and leave it the way it was, returning to the status quo. It's unclear. And then on the Donbass, I'll give you the separatist regions as long as you go back to the lines that were there on February 24th, which is about half of the Donbass. And I think what Russia's doing when they're pulling their forces back from Kiev is really even more so than before. Yesterday, I was saying, are they just kind of half pulling back? They're still shelling. What's going on? Now I get it. If they don't have the full Donbass, then they're pulling their forces back to try and secure that, because they're hoping, if I can be at that border or a little bit beyond it when we negotiate, then I'll go back and I'll get the whole region. And I can at least say, hey, I doubled the size of the Donbass separatist regions, which is a wonderful buffer for us.
Right.
And then I kept Crimea, and by the way, they won't join NATO. Okay, I'm a winner. I don't think anyone's, that's kind of Pyrrhic victory at that point, but it'll sell internally, maybe not to the Hawks. But what I'm trying to say is, you had a counter to that saying, hey, what if, China ends up getting in there and contracting and they end up building and they start doing one of those Belt and Roads things and they're partnered with Russia. And so they actually get a lot of control of more of of Ukraine. So that's open to debate as to where that'll end up. But what I'm saying is this. I'm not so sure now if any of us are talking about even the right thing, because, Biden seems to have stumbled into something that he values. And General Keane, I believe is his name, was on the news last night. He was saying what strikes him as interesting is that Biden doesn't seem to want, or his administration, to let Putin lose the war. That the tide has shifted. You're now got Zelensky asking for tanks. Tanks are an offensive weapon. He's trying to take back territory. And Biden is not willing to give him the tanks. Now, that's different than the MiGs. And so you're saying to yourself, hang on a second here. And then he said, look, at the end of the day, Biden should be in Ukraine slapping Zelensky on the back saying, we're here to help you. We're going to, make sure this territory is not lost. It will stay free. That kind of rhetoric, that really strong, we are all Ukrainians and Ukraine will be a free nation, it's not coming from Biden. It took him 4 weeks to get over there. He kind of went to Poland. He had some pizza. He didn't really say that much very strong at all, other than NATO's line is right here. We're gonna be here. And so the question becomes, why doesn't Biden want Russia to lose? Well, I would argue he doesn't want the war to end quickly. I think all the evidence is pointing to he wants Russia and Ukraine to sit and pummel each other while he pummels the Russian economy with sanctions, or maybe I shouldn't say Biden. Whoever's behind Biden,
exactly. Whoever's behind it
wants and I think Putin's figured this out. He's trying to back out, save some face, and get his economy, before it goes to nothing. But somebody's saying no. I want the sanctions in place for the next 6 months to a year.
Well, look, the thing is that he's doing a good job of saving face. And you talked about the other day. It's your idea that for China to come alongside, they wanted to see how Putin would do when he engaged in Ukraine. Would the Russian military be able to get to Kiev on day 2? Would they be able to plant their flag everywhere they went and do it as a form of a marathon, just an offshoot of the Olympics? Could they really do this quickly? And if they were able to, then China would say, yeah, we want to dance with you. But you postulated that if in fact Russia got quagmired, as they have, and they weren't able to meet certain objectives that everybody thought that they had, that China might back away from that relationship. That Putin would have shown that he was weaker than anyone knew on the world stage. But Putin he's a KGB trained master, so he knows propaganda inside out. He knows how to, the Sun Tzu, the art of warfare, when you are weak, feign strength, when you are strong, feign weakness. And so what he's been able to do is save face on the global arena of everybody who's watching him by making these very strong demands that gas and oil, the major export from Russia. And as a matter of fact, Russia is the second largest exporter of gas and oil, second only to Saudi Arabia. And so, and he's demanding that it be paid in rubles. Now, it's interesting because you might ask the question, well, where is he going to, how is he going to accept these payments in rubles because of these, trading sanctions? So aren't the banks being shut down? Well, the answer is yes, except for one. There's one bank that, it's called, it's sort of a Russian-esque, but Projosko Bank. Don't quote me on that. I'll find the name for it. But that bank has not been sanctioned, and it hasn't been sanctioned specifically to allow him to continue to conduct trade. And so this is the bank where all of these deposits will be made in rubles, and that bank will handle the conversion of the currency. So really, it's just a currency dealer exchange that's taking place. And so instead of using, the exchange in New York, which is where all the world's transactions typically are cleared, in dollar transactions, all of them. Now you'll be using a different, dealer to exchange the currency, and it will be this bank. And so
somebody has to go out and buy rubles, right, using dollars or euros.
Yeah,
he's getting a hard currency injection, right? So somebody comes along and says, "I need $100 million of rubles to beat my contract obligation." This bank, receives the $100 million and in exchange gives you rubles.
Yeah, and this is the bank that will do it. And so it's actually called Gazprom, Gazprom, Gazprom. So anyway, so he has, then that's just the mechanics of it, how that works. But the question is, how is it that this bank is allowed to operate? There's
Gazprom. Is that Gazprom Bank?
Gazprom Bank, yes.
Okay, because Gazprom is the big gas company, so they must have a financial owner. Okay.
Yeah, and so they're going to be able to accomplish the objective. He'll be able to save face, and this is also what we talked earlier about. Taking the pegged currency to oil away from the dollar. We've talked about how there's talk that there may be another reserve currency, a stronger reserve Chinese currency.
I think So can I address that Chinese reserve currency, or I don't want to interrupt if you're.
Let's just put a quick bookmark there.
Yeah.
But the renminbi is being offered as that reserve currency. But I kind of wanted to add a couple of slides here to add some color to your commentary. So let me see if I can add this in. So here we go. You're taking a look at Raytheon Technologies Corp. Let me see if I can get our picture here. That's better.
Yep.
And this is the past month, but you can just see this steep trajectory.
What day does that start on? Let me look a little closely there. Does that say February 24th?
Right. So does that not look like a hockey stick? Yeah. But the question that we're asking is, who wins? Who wins in all of this? Who is pulling the strings? Who's behind the scenes? And you made the case for the military-industrial complex. I think that if that were the case, that there should be something that could substantiate it. So, what about Lockheed Martin? Well, there you go. Look at how these stocks all of a sudden are popping. A 16.7, let's call it 17% increase in 1 month alone. Okay, does it end there? Oh, no. Look, in the past month, Northrop Grumman, so it's up 26%. Well, why in the world would these, Defense Department contracted companies be doing so well? There's no more Afghanistan. There's no more war. Well, perhaps there's a war that's coming, or a protracted war that exists that someone knows about, maybe helped encourage it. I'm not saying that. I'm just thinking out loud. Here's General Dynamics Corporation, up 16% in 1 month. And then here's Halliburton Corporation, that you'll remember from Dick Cheney fame, that in the past 6 months, Eric, it's up almost 72%. Okay, so I was watching Russell Brand the other day, and Russell Brand's got 5.3 million viewers right now, and so he came under attack by one of these blog people that nobody knows her in terms of her audience. Maybe she's got 300,000 readers. So she goes after Russell Brand because she wants to go after the celebrity so that she can get her audience to increase. And so Russell did a very good job of explaining, because his premise was, perhaps when Biden said that there's a new world order, another gaffe, that's not the gaffe, but he said it, a new world order, that she wrote an article saying, oh, well, Biden said new world order and all the conspiracy theorists are coming out of the woodwork. So, and she mentioned his program. So he very smartly gathered together the 72 documented coups where the United States has been involved in the last 30 years, 66 of them, which were not publicly made known until after the fact, and 6 which were publicly known. And so, he's saying that there is a basis for at least giving some thought, some attention, some consideration to the idea that, there are U.S. interest agencies, departments, companies, call them what you will, but they certainly stand to gain an advantage, financially or otherwise, geographically or otherwise, from assisting in Ukraine.
What's interesting to me is that I see the evidence that you're putting forward, and I agree with it. That the Afghanistan war is over. There's a lot of money spent there, a lot of people wealthy and made wealthy through that. And now, it's not surprising that in very short order we have another altercation somewhere in the world. It is a proxy war against Russia, against terrorism, these kinds of things. There's always some bigger issue at stake, and the war in that country is kind of the focal point. But it is really a huge economic transaction. And what I can't figure out is, are we suggesting that these companies are nefarious enough to, push these things? I think that has to be true. I mean, maybe in some ways they're doing it legally. I mean, at the end of the day, they get to put their voter contributions in just like everybody else. They can raise money for PACs.
Can I ask you a question? Were there weapons of mass destruction in Iran, Iraq?
That's absolutely right. But, and it was Colin Powell who held that up, and almost, supposedly had something in that vial. So it is I'm trying to wrap my head around. This is why we do this show. We want to hear people talk to us and tell us what they think. We're just average guys trying to figure this out ourselves. We do feel the impact and we want to respond appropriately. But, I'm trying to struggle between what's improper influence of, let's say, a Raytheon Corporation or somebody like them, General Dynamics, to force a war, or is it proper influence in the sense that, they're putting their money where their mouth is with the politicians. They're voting with their dollars and their votes. They're encouraging society, all these, even these influencers like this lady who's, challenging Russell Brand. Because what I can't figure out, and what is scaring me, is it almost seems like there's a group of, the big boys, and whether it's, I think it has to be some kind of corporate / governmental arrangement. There's people in government, there's people in corporations with the money that back the people in government, and it all works together. That's where you get these summits. But there's some group, and they allow certain people to gobble up their neighbors. And so what Russia did in Georgia was okay. What he did with the Crimea was okay.
Mm-hmm.
What he has threatened to do in other places, what he did in Chechnya was allowed, but now this is not allowed. And that's what I'm trying to figure out, is what made that the case. And, you have all kinds of potential answers. One could be, we needed a war. Let's keep, we have lots of lobbyists there from Raytheon, General Dynamics, and others saying, hey, we need to sell some weapons to somebody somewhere, right?
Yeah.
And every time Biden says that here's another $300 billion in aid to Ukraine, you can just rewrite that as, here's another $300 billion to General Dynamics to give aid to Ukraine. So it runs through somebody's balance sheet. Those companies make a profit as they're trying to give aid to Ukraine. The aid eventually gets to Ukraine. I think Ukraine needs aid, but where is the line between creating a problem so you can then increase your power and your wealth to solve it? What the heck happened with the Wuhan lab? I mean, was it let out on purpose, and then all of a sudden every governor in America and the president got emergency powers, and everyone was like, wow, look, we've gotten the populace used to fewer civil rights, and then tons of people made money. Whoever was there with the PPE and the masks and whatever else they produced, certainly the vaccination companies that produce those vaccines made a ton of money. And then you move on in the cycle, and then now we'll do a war, and then we'll follow it with a pandemic, and then we'll follow it with a climate change incident, then we'll follow it with another war. And you're just kind of flogging your population. And that's shocking to me. And I look at that and I say, that is, I don't know what the right word is, jaded and corrupt for sure, calculating for sure. But I think there's a bigger, worse word where somebody's just, there's a kind of antiseptic cruelty to it, that they just sit back and sort of use your populace like that. And I just read an article,
I would say that word might be summarized as historical accuracy.
It's true, but there's a it'll come to me, but I just got through reading an article about Justin Trudeau kind of laying out exactly what had happened with the truckers up there.
Mm-hmm.
And it was stunning to me to find out that, prior to, enacting the mandate that they had to be vaccinated or quarantined in order to get the last 10% to do what they didn't want to do. Clearly, you're down to 10% who are resisting for religious or other reasons. Maybe just because they have natural immunity already, they don't want to. Turns out you shouldn't get the vaccine if you already have natural immunity. But this last 10% won't break, and so he changes from them being essential workers, where they were completely set aside from any mandates whatsoever. So as essential workers, truckers were not required previously when the whole country was trying to mandate vaccines and, tried it for health reasons. And it was a generalized mandate. Truckers were exempt as essential workers. And then when everyone got 90% vaccinated, including the truckers themselves, and the last 10% were resisting, they were suddenly switched, and now they had to quarantine. So you can imagine, no wonder they reacted as they did, because they're sitting there saying, in 1 minute, I'm exempt because I'm critical. And then when you don't need me any longer, you're forcing me to do something, 10% of my colleagues don't want to do. Maybe I'm already vaccinated. And then, that led to emergency powers. And then they quoted this section where Trudeau said, are we willing to tolerate these people among us? They don't care about our health and whatnot. And so I want to kind of go back to the point of, I think we're watching escalation happen. I think each party thought they were in control of what was going on. I certainly think Putin thought he was in control. I think he thought, like you said, he was going to be in Kiev in 2 days. He was going to impress his new partner, Xi. They were going to solidify and get close. I really think he thought there would be very little reaction from the West. And, and then when that didn't happen, he's surprised. Now he's thinking, oh, well, I have the option to just back out. So I'll just reorder my forces, and I achieved my objectives, and I'll just go snatch the Donbass and get Crimea officially recognized and a pledge on NATO. And I won, right? But he's not being allowed to do that. Zelensky's starting to say, no, I can take territory back, especially with this half of the Donbass thing. I want to get back to what was originally disputed, not what you've gained in the last month. I think he's going to, leave. He's saying leave Crimea open, which really means I'm going to continue to challenge you in Crimea, which is negative for Russia. But here's what's fascinating. The Western powers don't want to give the sanctions on Russia. I think they're scrambling right now to find a way to resupply Germany. If you're the U.S., there were LNG plants that were planned for Germany, and they're on. I heard Germany's considering fast tracking those permits. Now Putin has kind of put his largest customer in play by mistake. You spent quite a bit of time on the Harry's Razor debacle.
Yeah.
And these guys, decided to criticize their largest distribution channel, advertising channel, and made the mistake of putting their product in play. And now there's a competing product. I hate Harry's. Inadvertently might have lost Germany.
Yeah.
Lost Germany.
But the thing is that, we're still trying to pierce the veil, to, look behind, see who the wizard is here in this whole Oz scenario, because, ultimately let's just fly off the cuff on a couple of topics. You've definitely got that. I think Hunter Biden is about to be indicted. There's more than enough evidence. Even the mainstream media is saying that, yeah, those emails were legit, that laptop was in fact Hunter Biden's. Now the assistant to the technology division of the FBI just admitted to Matthew Gaetz in Congress that he doesn't know where the laptop is. So we have these shenanigans going on, and they've been going on for a long time. But the fact of the matter is, they've got Hunter Biden investing $500,000, raising $30 million for a biohazardous lab in Ukraine. They now have a connection that shows that the Wuhan lab virus research that was being done on bats was part of that lab's operations out of Ukraine. So there's a connection back to there. They're subpoenaing, also making a subpoena of the records of the banking accounts of Hunter Biden, and I would infer that that's going to go up the ladder, to the next. And so but let me just say, so that's one thing. I mean, this is the art of distraction, right? That's what you do when there's discontent in the domestic land. You start foreign wars, or you engage in them. So look, we're going to talk again about what. Let's bring this down a notch to where the rubber meets the road. People are putting more expensive gas, in their tanks. This is going to affect the midterms. They're out in November. Here's a perfect storm, and here's a scenario for you to consider, Eric, is that, hey, look, we're opening up our special reserves, and those are the reserves that we have that were begun in 1970 or 1974. And they are derived from these salt domes that run along the coast from the Gulf Coast from Texas to Louisiana. And at the fullest capacity they've ever been has been 700 million barrels. So right now we're down to about 450 million with this last mandate for Biden to draw 160 from it. And that's 6 months out. Well, what's happening in 6 months? Right? We're right up on the midterms. And if he needs to bring the price of gas down more, let's say he releases another 100 million. Well, let's keep track of the math here. We're about to be at that point below half of what those reserves should be at capacity.
Reserves are not so strategic anymore at that
They're
level.
not so strategic. And by the way, 700 million barrels, when it's full to capacity or as high as it's ever been, only represents 2 days of energy for the global consumption, right?
In the U.S. consumption.
Well, it's global consumption, not just U.S., but global consumption, 2 days. So you're talking about 350 million barrels a day globally, right? But my point is simply this, is that it's a perfect storm because we're going to be 6 months further into this Ukrainian debacle. You and I both agree that this seems to be a protracted conflict. It's not going away anytime soon.
Well, I want to be clear. I think that Biden or whoever's behind him wants to keep it as a protracted conflict. And so would Raytheon, and so would General Dynamics. And so, so there's a lot of people lining up who want to keep this war happening. And that's, I think, the point of the woman's article when she said, we're willing to fight the war to the last Ukrainian life.
Yes.
And that's the real sadness here, is that the Ukrainian people are caught between a rock and a hard place because, Putin's aggression, has now failed. But there are other people who are saying, yeah, but he has to be spanked a little bit harder. And I want to take this as an opportunity to draw him down conventionally. And so think about it. If the man's military he's already put it in question. If you can't, what's odd to me, and somebody else made this point, was, you've got Germany and others saying we're going to throw our 2, 3, 4% in. We're going to increase our military spending. We're going to build up and bulk up NATO. In a strange way, it's ironic because it's just been proven that he can't take over cities that are 20 miles from his own border. Right, that are more poorly defended than anything NATO has. So I don't really think Poland's at risk here. If anything, the Polish might wipe out the Russians. I mean, really, and with all this increased spending, now these are government officials. So you get a war, you take the opportunity to quote increase your spending, and the populace goes, yeah, good job. But at the end of the day, what we've seen is that Russia's military is not anywhere near as scary as we thought it was. The Ukrainians are not a crack military outfit, and they're doing just fine defending.
No, but what's scary is, on the one hand, and we've been made to think it's scary, is that Putin has access to, nuclear weapons. But what most people aren't considering is, he's had it for 30 years too. So, it's not
That's what I was going to say. There's 3 legs to the stool, right? He's got nuclear power, economic power, and then he's got military power. Well, his military power just got taken off the table, or at least severely downgraded. His economic power also severely downgraded. And I think to the extent he forces the ruble issue, that's going to backfire. I think that's going to encourage Germany even more, saying, look, you are now in breach of the contract, and I don't want to go out scrounging for rubles and take that ruble risk even for a couple of hours when you're telling me the currency itself is sinking. I mean, think about that. You can go buy the rubles, and by the time you close the transaction the next day, you can have lost, 10%, 20%, 30% of the transaction. These are large transactions. I think this is why I'm saying things are getting out of hand. Now, I wanted to ask you, because you mentioned, so all that's left is his nuclear power, is what I'm trying to say. I'll make that point before I move on. 3-legged stool, military gone, economy almost gone, and now he's left with nuclear. And your point, 30-year-old nuclear power. How effective really is it?
No, my point is this: is not that it's 30-year-old nuclear power. It's that he's had the ability to engage, intercontinental ballistic nuclear.
Yeah, and he hasn't done it. Yeah, so
For
he's not
30
likely
years.
to.
So he's not
Yeah.
a madman. This isn't a guy
Yeah.
who's, going to just fly off the handle. He's very tempered. He knows the power that he holds, and he wields it responsibly in that
Yeah,
regard.
he's using it as a background threat. But let me ask you a question. You said he owes $130 million, right? Didn't he have trouble making his last bank payment, which was much smaller? Aren't there bonds coming due or something? I
That
heard.
120 million payment, he made it easily.
Oh, he made it. Okay, and what was it? Was that dollar denominated?
Yeah, it was dollar denominated. Now the next,
Because I'm trying to figure. When's the next one?
He's got a bigger bond payment that's coming up, and I think this move for the rubles, tomorrow.
That's what I'm thinking. He's trying to gather cash.
Yeah,
he might be trying to gather cash to make his debt payments. But this is where I'm trying to say, I think this is certainly out of Putin's control at this point. I think he's reacting at this point. He didn't go the way he planned. He didn't have the reserve that he thought he was. Calling it, one of the gentlemen I saw on NTD News, who's a local expert, was saying calling up 130,000 conscript soldiers is a significantly negative political move for him. And when they start dying, it'll get even worse. And, obviously at that point, when you're calling up, untrained conscript soldiers who aren't recently in the military, people realize that you're just throwing bodies at the problem. Mm-hmm. That's a bad signal. So you've got, I think, the Biden administration has sort of lucked into a strategic opportunity for the U.S. here, which is to just, maintain the sanctions, try to become, if Trump was in power, the first thing he'd be saying is, Germany, I've got your oil and gas needs. I'll be sending LNG tankers tomorrow, right? He would step into the role that Putin has had and sell them that gas. Other people will do it. Maybe, Trump, or who knows who will get an election, who will do it, even from the U.S. We could have been that party. We could have, if he was still in power right now, a lot of things would be different. But here's what I'm trying to say. Putin's at this point reacting. He's giving quite a bit before he's even really come to the table. Zelensky is becoming emboldened. He wants tanks because he wants to push Russia back to where they were. I think in particular, the city of Mariupol is going to be an argument because I think that's sort of a gateway to the ocean there. Guess what? The Biden administration is becoming emboldened. Why they don't go over there and give more moral support? Because I don't think they want Putin to just collapse and pull out. They want this thing to go on because it gives them plenty of, I think, cover to do the things they want to do, which is to destroy the Russian economy. It's a kind of proxy war with China. Okay, China, you teamed up with this guy. Let's see how this looks. We're going to sanction you. We're going to do this. We're all intertwined. We're starting to see that globalism has changed the face of the earth over the last 50 to 100 years, for certain. And that's why you're pointing out, you can be in open war with somebody and still do a kind of energy transaction, down below with them, whereas when you look at World War II, the whole argument, the whole fight in Africa and the Middle East, Lawrence of Arabia, all of that was the Germans trying to get energy to maintain their battle preparedness.
Yeah.
And,
right.
and the Battle of the Bulge was the final battle in the war, and they were going for gas. That's what they were going for. So we saw how energy, really affected World War II. They didn't control Africa. They didn't control the Middle East, and therefore they weren't able to continue having energy except from the Caucasus Mountains.
Yeah. Well, let me use an analogy that you use, and then we're literally at the 1 hour mark. So I'm going to follow up with a question, ask you to maybe put 5 minutes to that, and we'll spitball it out of here. But we could go on as we often do for hours. But and we want to say, first of all, thank you to whoever is watching and who will be watching, and please leave your comments in the section below. Let us know what you think. Let us know if there's topics that you want us to cover. There's a lot that we want to get to. We've just been sort of quagmired on the Ukrainian topic.
I've been told by friends we should ask you to like and subscribe. So there we go.
Oh, yes, exactly. Like and subscribe so the YouTube algorithm can do its thing. But what I wanted to do, to use the analogy that you often do in the schoolyard bullies, if Putin is over there and he's got a baseball bat, and Zelensky his troops are basically armed with sticks. At some point you can achieve peace. It may not be the peace that you want. It may not be the negotiation that would be ideal for you, but you could probably get off with giving Putin the Donbass region, maybe a little bit more of Crimea, and taking a chance to rebuild and rethink how you might handle this going forward. But what has Zelensky done? The 11 opposition political parties are pretty much not allowed to operate right now. It's kind of a martial law. The 7 media companies have been consolidated into one. So he's starting to become somewhat of an authoritarian figure himself. And the U.S. ultimately is going to give him a bat. And now you're going to have a lot of deaths resulting because you're giving him equivalent firepower just to kill Russians so that Russians can kill more Ukrainians. And the loss is of human life. And that's the real atrocity here. So we want out, but nobody is speaking peace right now. They're speaking escalation. My question to you, though, has to do with the impact of Russia cutting off the gas and oil supplies to the EU member countries and those that are outside of it, like the UK and Germany. Because what those countries are doing right now, their leaders are preparing their people and telling them, we will start rationing fuel if it comes to that. That's like phase 3. But what they're asking them to do is to, on their own, cut back on their fuel. Travel less, do less, consume less, because it's better to do it now in the spring and the summer than it is in the winter. And so, but what happens is this is government once again seizing an opportunity to gain control, just like COVID. Hey, you can't go out. Hey, you can't do this. Hey, you have to wear a mask. Hey, and now you're basically going to say, stop driving your car, stop using fuel. I mean, how will the Germans respond to it? The same as the UK is not as affected, but still, the average price of gas in the UK is 6 times the 10-year average. So, people in the UK aren't too happy about this, but Australia and, other countries that are dependent on Russian gas and oil. And once again, you're going and telling the population, we're going on rations.
So my short answer would be that I think they'll fall into line. And I think this is a function of many decades of slowly increasing authoritarian control. But I would add to that, increasing communication. Through the technologies that we've gained, people are more aware of issues going on far away from them that don't necessarily affect their local neighborhood. This is the function of news. And it started when the telegraph line went in from, I think, Texas to New York. And I think the gentleman said, what have I wrought? I think it was Mr. Morse, actually, from Morse code. And what he had wrought was the connectivity between Texas. And so people started looking they go to the telegraph station and look up on this bulletin board to see what had happened in New York. It doesn't affect them. It used to be the grain prices in the town 2 towns over that was hot news and exciting. And because you had to sell your grain.
Yeah.
So what we're seeing here is that governments are taking advantage of things that are happening far away to create narratives. And those narratives always, coincidentally, have the same point, which is we need to protect the populace against this. By the way, you may not personally feel threatened with COVID, but somebody's grandma is threatened with COVID. You may not personally be threatened that you're going to be sent to the Ukrainian front lines because you're not between 18 and 40, but your son or granddaughter might be. So there's a lot of indirect threats. And they prey upon the good-heartedness of the general population. So I don't want anyone's grandmother to die from COVID. I don't want anyone's son to be sent to Ukraine. So I will, do the right thing. And they sell it that way. And that's the sadness for me, because it takes these good-hearted people, which are most people, a long time to get cynical. It takes them a long time to say, is this really just about increasing government power? Is it really every government doing this? Are the Canadians doing this? That's why I love the trucker thing in Canada, because everyone just thinks of Canadians as, generally speaking, nice, doing the right thing.
Yes.
They're not really a threatening country at all. And so to see that somebody there would be threatening their own people, seizing, little aunts and uncles' bank accounts because they donated to this trucker rally. So what I think is fascinating here is that I think we're going to see, with the amount of intercommunication around the world, let's face it. I mean, when Thailand gets hit with a tsunami, there's a worldwide response. Praise God. I'm glad there's a worldwide response to help.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But there's the other side of it, which is that we're constantly bombarded with emergency, crisis, devastation, things that scare us, that frighten us, we wouldn't want to have happen to ourselves. We're putting ourselves in people's shoes. We're getting psychologically and emotionally exhausted as a people.
Yeah.
And guess what happens when you're exhausted? You just say, somebody help me.
It's a surrender.
Somebody help me. Yeah, just somebody. I can't deal with the Ukraine war. I can't deal with the pandemic. I can't deal with the truckers, being kicked out by force and the horses trampling, the kids being locked up in Australia, my own kids suffering with the math in school. I'm trying to pay my bills. The gas prices are going up. Just somebody fix it. And people start willingly, they're not being duped. They are willingly giving power over. Somebody please fix this.
Yeah.
And we see this in human psychology all over the place. And this is how you get gang leaders. This is how you get political figures like Hitler. This is how you get, really bad things happening. That's why, we can end the show on this point. I think things are truly escalating out of control. And at that point,
it's how you get rogue homeowner association presidents.
Exactly. It's how you get, multi-gazillion-dollar actors walking up on stage and slapping somebody who's a colleague and a peer. I mean, people are under tremendous stress, and people don't have a sense of control, and they're looking for a place to control. Whether it's the riots that we saw last summer, those are just kids saying, nothing's working. I'm just pissed. I'm going to burn some crap down, And if you get in my way, I'm going to beat the tar out of you because I'm not really thinking. And then there's politicians going, hey, let's use that. And then a little while later, oh my gosh, crime is increasing. There literally is opportunism at every level. And this is why I'm saying, the world let Putin think you can gobble up, Georgia, you can gobble up the Crimea, you can do this, that, and these are things okay. Who cares about Ukraine? And by the way, I think the Bidens and their team were going there abusing Ukraine too. Here's the country stuck in the middle. So you put our biolabs there. We want you to do this dirty work here, and Russia wants you to do that dirty work. And they keep coming to the person saying, each side saying, hey, I'm going to punch you in the face if you don't do my dirty work.
The other day,
Ukraine is it's like a ping pong ball.
You had mentioned, I think the Clintons. I mean, surely someone is going to take advantage of Ethiopia. Or Africa or these impoverished countries, and you were trying to coin a term for that, and
yes,
I think
global gentrification.
No, political oligarchs.
Oh yeah, political oligarchs. That's right. Yeah. In our own country, we have that. We have the Bushes, we have the Clintons. Now we have the Trumps. You can say the Obamas. And you're getting, and then you look around, and Zelensky's an interesting one because he popped up out of nowhere as a comedian. Apparently played on a show where he magically became president or something. But what I think is interesting to me is everybody was using Ukraine as kind of its dumping ground. It was stuck in between NATO because everything else is NATO. Except Ukraine, which is ironic to me. Russia's kind of, it has no standing. Yeah. And when you're in between two great powers and you have no standing, you become the lackey. And I think Zelensky, perhaps this guy was more of a genius pre-war than really now. Maybe him pushing for the NATO membership is kind of what maybe he wanted to have something happen. He wanted to create a catalyst because let's think about it. I mean, his country is bombed out. His people have been abused. Many have died. But you know what's funny? He's winning. He's starting to turn the tide, and he's asking now for offensive weapons.
Let's pick up on that because, we're kind of saying, is he winning, or what is it to win? That's a better question at this point.
Well, I'll leave the show with this answer.
Yeah.
What is it to win for Zelensky? It's to repel Russia and get rebuilt by the West.
Yeah, that would be his definition of win. But the likelihood of that happening, well, let's just say I think we're going to have a few more programs around this topic.
Let me put $1 on it. I think that Russia is going to pull back to the Donbass, maybe all of it, maybe half of it. Crimea is going to be put in a box, and they're going to basically be pushed out of the country. And Zelensky is going to fall into the loving arms of the West. Not because they want to help him, but because they want to sell contracts to their construction companies. It would be interesting to graph if a guy like you knows numbers. If you could graph armaments companies, military companies, and how they go up, and shortly thereafter, do the construction companies' stocks go up?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. Because in the U.S., Home Depot and mortgage companies are all going down right now, 52-week lows.
Yeah. And every time you have a Hurricane Katrina or something, they all go up, right? So we go in and blow it all up, and then you come in and build it all up.
Hey, look, before we roll out of here, let me give you an opportunity to plug your show. Eric has a program called
Spirits and Spirituality. And
where
the
can they
spirits are
find
an
you and
afternoon
when?
drink, a nightcap that we share together. Hopefully, you have like brandy, port, something, and then we talk about large spiritual issues. I like to wax eloquent when I'm having a drink late at night, and if you want to join me, you can do that. Spirits and Spirituality.
Where do they find you and when?
You find me on YouTube. That's the name of the channel. And then when varies. It's usually Thursday nights, Hawaii time, around 9 to 10 o'clock.
All
I'll
right,
have to
great.
get a more specific time.
All
Thank
right.
you very much, Dave. This has been fun.
Yeah, it's been fun. So you've been watching Against All Odds. Tonight is March 31st, 2022. We've enjoyed spending time with you. Again, please leave your comments and we will see you next week.